Marcus Williams had been fixing elevators in luxury buildings for 2 years, but he'd never seen anything that made him forget how to breathe until Elena Rodriguez stepped out of the broken elevator in that grey evening dress. The fabric clung to her curves like silk against marble, and the emergency lighting cast shadows that made the screwdriver slip from his hands and clatter against the metal floor like his resolve. He cursed under his breath, crouching to retrieve the tool while trying not to stare at the way the dress had ridden up slightly on her thighs, or how her hair had come loose from its perfect updo to frame her face in dark waves. The building's generator hummed overhead, but all Marcus could focus on was the soft sound of her breathing and the way she looked at him like he was salvation itself. "My hero," she said, stepping from the elevator with a shaky laugh that did something dangerous to his chest. Her black heels dangled from manicured fingers, and without them she seemed smaller, more vulnerable, close enough that he caught her perfume, something expensive that made him think of midnight and mistakes he wanted to make. Marcus straightened, toolkit in hand, forcing himself to meet her eyes, dark brown with flecks of gold that caught the emergency lighting. She was beautiful in a way that belonged in boardrooms and charity galas, not standing barefoot in a maintenance hallway, looking at him like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to rescue her. "Just doing my job, Ms. Rodriguez," he managed, though his voice came out rougher than intended. "Elena," she corrected, the same way she had the few times they'd spoken in passing. But this time, her voice carried something different, invitation wrapped in relief. Thunder crashed overhead, and the building's lights flickered. Elena glanced toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, where rain lashed against glass like desperate fingers, then back at him with an expression that made his pulse quicken. "The power's been cutting out all night," she said, moving closer to where he knelt by the elevator controls, close enough that he could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way her lips parted when she was nervous. "My apartment's completely dark. Even my phone died." Marcus nodded, hyper-aware of her presence as he worked the override controls. The scent of her perfume mixed with the storm's electricity, creating something intoxicating in the air between them. "There," he said, finally getting the elevator functional. "Should hold now." Elena didn't move away. Instead, she looked at him with those gold-flecked eyes and said quietly, "Would you mind checking my electrical panel? I know it's late, but with the storm—" Her voice trailed off, but something in her tone made him wonder if she was asking for more than electrical work. The space between them felt charged, dangerous, like lightning waiting to strike. "Of course," Marcus heard himself say, knowing he was crossing a line he'd sworn never to cross. As they walked toward her penthouse, Marcus felt the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them like the storm outside, beautiful, terrifying, and impossible to ignore. The elevator doors parted with a mechanical groan, but Marcus barely noticed the sound over the thundering of his own pulse. Elena stepped into the hallway, and the grey dress that had stolen his breath now seemed to shimmer in the emergency lighting, clinging to curves that made his mouth go dry. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying something deeper than gratitude. Standing this close, Marcus could see how the storm had left its mark, her hair falling in dark waves around her shoulders, her lips slightly parted from the ordeal, the way her chest rose and fell with each breath. Thunder crashed overhead, and the building's emergency lights flickered again. Elena's hand found his arm, fingers pressing against his shirt sleeve with an intimacy that sent electricity through his veins. "The power's been cutting out all night," she said, her touch lingering longer than necessary. "My apartment's completely dark. Even my phone died." She looked up at him through lowered lashes. "Would you mind checking the electrical panel? I know it's late, but with the storm—" Marcus nodded, following her down the marble hallway while trying not to watch the hypnotic sway of her hips. Her penthouse stretched endlessly, artwork barely visible in shadows that seemed to wrap around them like velvet. The air held traces of her perfume mixed with vanilla candles, creating an atmosphere that felt more like seduction than emergency repair. He found the electrical panel behind an antique cabinet, his hands steadier on the controls than his racing heart. The main breaker had tripped, simple fix, but Eleanor stood close enough that he could feel her warmth, hear the soft rustle of silk against skin. "There," he said, flipping the switch. Lights bloomed throughout the apartment, but somehow the illumination only made her more beautiful, highlighting the golden flecks in her eyes, the elegant line of her neck. "Can I get you something?" she asked, barefoot now on polished hardwood, the grey dress pooling around her feet like liquid mercury. "Coffee, something stronger." Every instinct screamed warnings about boundaries and consequences, but the way she looked at him, like he was something worth wanting rather than just useful, made those warnings fade to whispers. "Coffee sounds good," he heard himself say. She returned with 2 steaming mugs, settling onto the enormous white couch with feline grace. When she patted the cushion beside her, Marcus felt his resistance crumble like sand. "I'm Elena," she said, though they both knew this introduction was just an excuse to sit closer. "Marcus." He chose the spot she'd indicated, close enough to catch her scent, to notice the way candlelight played across her collarbones. Lightning illuminated the room, followed by thunder that seemed to shake more than just the building's foundation. "Looks like this storm isn't going anywhere soon," Elena said, her eyes never leaving his face. "Would you mind staying until it passes?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and promise. Marcus studied her face, searching for games, but finding only desire barely held in check. "I can stay," he said, his voice rougher than intended. As the storm raged outside, they talked in voices growing softer with each passing hour, the space between them shrinking until their knees touched, and every accidental brush of fingers felt like fire. Morning light filtered through the lobby's glass walls, but Marcus felt like he was moving through a dream. The taste of Elena's coffee still lingered on his lips, along with the memory of how she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder at dawn, her hair spilling across his chest like silk. He'd watched her sleep for 20 minutes before carefully extracting himself, leaving her curled on the couch like a beautiful secret. Williams. Building manager Robert Hayes emerged from his office with the expression of a man who'd received interesting phone calls. "Need to talk to you." Marcus's stomach tightened, but not with the usual fear. Something had shifted during those storm-charged hours in Elena's penthouse. He felt different, bolder, like he'd crossed a line and discovered the other side wasn't as dangerous as he'd imagined. "Everything all right, Mr. Hayes?" "Mrs. Patterson from 12B called this morning. Says she saw you leaving the penthouse around 6 a.m. Hayes's voice carried careful neutrality. "Want to explain that?" Before Marcus could respond, the elevator chimed with perfect timing. Eleanor stepped out wearing a crisp navy suit, but Marcus could see traces of their night together, a subtle flush to her cheeks, the way her eyes found his immediately, the small smile that played at her lips like a shared secret. "Mr. Hayes," she said, moving toward them with the same confidence she'd shown in that grey dress, though now it was wrapped in professional armor. "I hope Mrs. Patterson mentioned that Marcus saved me from a very uncomfortable night." Her choice of words made Marcus's pulse quicken. Uncomfortable. As if being trapped in an elevator was the only discomfort she'd faced, not the way they'd gravitated toward each other like magnets, or how her hand had found his during a particularly violent thunder crash. Hayes shifted to his deferential stance. "Ms. Rodriguez, I was just getting his report." The storm knocked out my power completely. Elena continued, her voice smooth as honey. "Marcus ensured everything stayed functional through the night. Very thorough work." The way she said thorough made heat pool in Marcus's stomach. Marcus watched her weave truth into protection, saying everything and nothing about coffee shared. At 3 a.m., about conversations that had nothing to do with electrical systems, about the moment her fingers had traced his palm while she'd talked about her childhood. Of course, Hayes said, making notes. Emergency protocols. Elena's eyes met Marcus's briefly, a flash of something that promised this wasn't ending here, that professional boundaries were just obstacles to navigate, not walls to hide behind. "I'll be sure to commend his dedication in writing," she said. "The building is fortunate to have someone so attentive to detail." The words were perfect, professional, safe. But underneath ran a current of promise that made Marcus's skin burn. As Elena walked toward the exit, her hips swaying with deliberate grace, Marcus caught the subtle look she threw over her shoulder. A glance that said last night was just the beginning. Her coffee cup was still in his truck, along with the memory of how she'd tasted when she'd kissed his cheek goodbye. 3 days of carefully orchestrated near misses had Marcus's nerves stretched thin as wire. Elena appeared in his peripheral vision like smoke. A glimpse of her in the lobby when he was servicing upper floors, the sound of her laughter echoing from the mailroom when he was 2 hallways away. She was hunting him with the patience of a predator who knew her prey was already caught. Thursday afternoon, she cornered him in the maintenance room. Marcus. He looked up from the workbench where he'd been pretending to organize screws, his hands stilling when he saw her leaning against the doorframe. She wore jeans that hugged every curve and a soft grey sweater that made him remember silk sliding under his fingers. Ms. Rodriguez. The formality felt ridiculous after she'd fallen. Asleep in his arms. "Stop." She stepped into the room, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a trap springing shut. "We're past that, aren't we?" The maintenance room felt charged with her presence. Tool racks and supply shelves that usually provided order now seemed to close in around them, creating intimate shadows despite the fluorescent lighting. "I don't know what we're past," he said, but his voice betrayed him, coming out rougher than intended. Elena moved closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, could see the pulse beating at her throat. "The night you told me about your mother's garden while I traced patterns on your palm? When you watched me sleep and thought I didn't notice?" Heat flooded through him. She had noticed. Of course she had. "That was different," he said weakly. "Emergency situation." Nonsense. She was close enough now that he could feel her warmth. "You think I curl up against every maintenance worker who fixes my electrical problems?" Marcus gripped the edge of the workbench, knuckles white. "Elena, have dinner with me." The words hung between them like a challenge and a caress, direct, loaded with promise. "You don't know what you're asking," he said, but his resistance was crumbling like sand against tide. "I'm asking for what we both want." She stepped closer, close enough that her breath ghosted against his neck. "I want to know if that storm was just circumstance, or if you feel this too, this pull between us that has nothing to do with broken elevators and everything to do with the way you look at me like I'm the only woman in the world." Her fingers brushed his arm, and Marcus felt his carefully constructed walls collapse entirely. "Friday," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. 7 o'clock. Carmen's on 7th Street. Elena's smile was pure victory, beautiful and dangerous. "Perfect. And Marcus?" She leaned in close enough that her lips almost brushed his ear. "Wear something I can't wait to take off." She left him standing there, hands shaking and body burning, already counting the hours until Friday night. Carmen's crystalline atmosphere felt like stepping into Elena's world, all polished surfaces and careful choreography. Marcus stood outside the glass doors in his best shirt, watching couples emerge from cars that cost more than his annual salary, while desire and dread warred in his chest. Elena appeared like something from a magazine, sliding her arm through his with possessive confidence. The black dress she wore made his mouth go dry, but her smile held the same heat that had burned between them in the maintenance room. "You look good enough to devour," she murmured against his ear as they followed the hostess, her words sending fire straight through his veins. Their table sat near the window, intimate under candlelight that painted Elena's skin gold. Marcus pulled out her chair, hyper-aware of how conversations paused as they settled in, but more aware of how Eleanor's fingers trailed across his hand when he helped seat her. "The seafood here is incredible," she said, but her eyes never left his face. "Though I have to warn you, wine makes me impulsive." Marcus felt heat pool low in his stomach. Define impulsive. Her smile was pure sin, the kind that makes me forget about appropriate boundaries and professional conduct. A server appeared, young, white, smile aimed primarily at Elena, with barely concealed confusion at their pairing. Marcus felt the familiar weight of judgment, but Elena's foot found his under the table, her bare toe tracing his ankle with deliberate provocation. "Red wine," Elena said, her fingers finding his across the table. Something Italian and intoxicating. When the server left, she leaned forward, the neckline of her dress revealing just enough to make Marcus forget his own name. "You sure about the water? This is supposed to be a celebration." "Celebrating what?" he asked, though his thumb was already tracing circles on her palm. "The fact that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that storm." Her confession was bold, unashamed. "The way you looked at me like I was something precious. The way your hands felt when you steadied me in the elevator." Marcus was about to respond when he caught the couple at the next table, staring with barely disguised fascination. The woman whispered something that included the word interesting, her husband's gaze calculating and invasive. "Let them look," Elena said, following his gaze. Her hand tightened on his. "Let them wonder what a woman like me sees in a man like you." "And what do you see?" Marcus asked, forcing himself to meet her eyes instead of scanning for more stares. Elena's smile was slow, devastating. "I see strong hands that know how to fix things, eyes that see me, not just my bank account, a mouth that makes me want to forget every rule I've ever followed." The server returned with wine, launching into descriptions that Elena navigated with one hand, while the other remained possessively intertwined with Marcus's fingers. As their orders were taken, Marcus caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Unusual. Pairing? Wonder what the story is there." But Elena's thumb was tracing patterns on his wrist that made coherent thought impossible. "Salmon," Marcus told the server, his voice steady despite the way Elena was looking at him like she wanted to skip dinner entirely. The judgment of strangers faded into background noise. Tonight, Marcus was beginning to understand that wanting Elena might be worth any amount of scrutiny. Monday morning arrived with the taste of Elena's goodbye kiss still lingering on Marcus's lips, and 3 voicemails stacked on Robert Hayes's desk like ammunition. Marcus sat across from the building manager, still wearing his work clothes, but carrying himself differently. Shoulders back, eyes steady, like a man who'd discovered he was worth wanting. "Mrs. Patterson again," Hayes said, not looking up from printed emails. "Says she's uncomfortable with your overly familiar behavior with certain residents. Mr. Chen claims you were discussing personal matters during a routine repair, and this morning I got a call from the board." Marcus kept his hands relaxed on his knees, remembering how those same hands had tangled in Elena's hair Saturday night when she'd kissed him goodnight against her front door. "What kind of call?" Hayes finally looked at him with the expression of a man dealing with something beyond his control. "The kind where people use words like inappropriate conduct and professional standards. They're asking questions, Williams, pointed questions." Through the glass partition, Marcus could see other maintenance staff going about their routines, oblivious to the storm gathering around him. But he wasn't the same man who'd once cowered at the thought of resident complaints. "I haven't violated any policies," Marcus said, voice steady. "Saturday night at Carmen's downtown. Hayes said, pulling out a folder. "You and the penthouse resident. Half the building's board saw you there, Williams. They're saying it looked intimate." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. Not shame, but defiance. It had been intimate. Elena's hand in his, the way she'd leaned into him at dinner, how she'd kissed his palm when she thought no one was looking. "I'm allowed to have dinner," Marcus said carefully. "Not with residents." Hayes pulled out Marcus's employment contract, pages marked with yellow highlighter. Section 12, subsection 4, professional boundaries with tenants. The words blurred as Marcus read them, but his resolve remained clear. Those boundaries had been crossed the moment Elena stepped out of that elevator in grey silk. And he wouldn't pretend otherwise. "She asked me to dinner," Marcus said. "I didn't pursue anything inappropriate." Hayes's expression carried reluctant sympathy. "Look, Williams, you're a good worker, but this isn't about what you did. It's about what it looks like. These people pay premium prices for a certain environment." "What does that mean?" "It means they want service staff who understand their place." Hayes closed the contract. "The board meets Thursday. They're discussing your employment status." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach, not fear for himself, but for what losing this job would mean. His mother's medications, the stability he'd built, the future he'd started imagining with Elena. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked. Hayes studied him for a long moment. "Distance yourself from Ms. Rodriguez. No more personal conversations, no more dinners. Keep your head down, and maybe this blows over." Marcus nodded slowly, but his mind was already working. Elena had armed him with more than just desire. She'd shown him what it felt like to be valued, to take up space, to matter. "Thursday," Hayes repeated. "Don't give them more ammunition before then." As Marcus left the office, he realized he wasn't willing to go back to being invisible. Not anymore. Marcus was adjusting tension in the building's HVAC system when Tony's voice crackled through his radio with unusual urgency. "Marcus, get to the lobby, now! Elena's going nuclear!" He descended to find Elena standing in the marble lobby's center, like a warrior queen, still wearing her courtroom armor, but with fire in her eyes that spoke of personal battles. 5 residents surrounded her, including Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Chen, their voices carrying the indignation of people unaccustomed to being challenged by someone they couldn't intimidate. Completely unprofessional behavior from building staff, Mrs. Patterson was saying, her pearls catching afternoon light like defensive armor. "What exactly do you find unprofessional?" Elena's voice cut through their murmurs like a blade forged in legal steel. "That Marcus excels at his job? That he treats residents with respect? Or that he occasionally engages in basic human conversation?" Marcus stayed near the elevator bank, knowing his presence would escalate whatever war Elena had declared, but unable to look away from the magnificent sight of her defending him with courtroom precision. Mr. Chen stepped forward, expensive suit immaculate, despite his obvious agitation. "Ms. Rodriguez, surely you understand the importance of maintaining proper boundaries between residents and service personnel." "Service personnel?" Elena's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "You mean Marcus Williams, the man who's kept this building running flawlessly for 2 years? The one who fixed your daughter's flooding disaster last Christmas without charging overtime?" Hayes emerged from his office with the careful urgency of a man trying to contain a public relations nightmare. But Elena was just getting started. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately," Hayes suggested. "No." Elena's voice carried across the lobby with the authority of someone accustomed to winning impossible cases. "I think transparency is exactly what we need here. Are these residents suggesting that Marcus should be disciplined for being competent and courteous?" Mrs. Patterson clutched her purse like a shield. "We're suggesting that certain relationships are inappropriate and make other residents uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable how?" Elena stepped closer, and Marcus recognized her cross-examination stance. Predatory, precise, devastating. Has Marcus's work performance declined? Has he been disrespectful? Has he violated any actual policy? Or are you simply uncomfortable seeing building staff treated like human beings? The lobby fell silent, except for climate control and distant traffic, but Marcus could feel the electricity crackling around Elena like she was channeling lightning. "This adversarial attitude proves our point," Mr. Chen said quietly. "Inappropriate relationships affecting professional dynamics." Elena's face flushed with righteous fury. "The only thing inappropriate here is a group of residents ganging up on an employee because they can't stand seeing him treated with the respect he's earned." Hayes stepped between them, but Marcus could see the damage spreading like fault lines through bedrock. Elena's passionate defense had transformed him from a minor problem into a cause worth fighting for, but it had also painted a target on both. Their backs, visible to everyone who mattered. Marcus's studio apartment felt like a prison cell at midnight, walls pressing in with the weight of impossible choices. He sat on his second-hand couch, staring at bills spread across the coffee table, his mother's prescriptions, rent, truck payment, the careful arithmetic of survival that had governed his life for 28 years. Tomorrow was Thursday. The board meeting. The day they would decide whether Marcus Williams was worth keeping around. His phone buzzed with Elena's fifth text. "Let me help. We can figure this out together." Together. The word felt like luxury he couldn't afford. Marcus had learned early that reaching for things beyond his station only led to them being ripped away with interest. The knock came at 9:30. Marcus opened the door to find Elena in jeans and a Georgetown law sweatshirt, looking younger but no less determined. "You weren't answering your phone," she said. "Elena, you can't be here." "Why not? Because your neighbors might see?" She pushed past him into the apartment, taking in his sparse furniture. "This is where you live. This is where people like me live," Marcus said. "People who can't afford to lose their jobs over principle." Elena turned to face him. "What happened to the man who told me about growing up in East Charlotte, who talked about his mother's garden?" "That was someone who forgot his place for a few hours," Marcus said. "Today reminded me. Your place, according to who? Mrs. Patterson? Board members who've never changed a light bulb themselves?" Marcus sat heavily on the couch. "According to reality. You defended me today like I was worth defending, and all it did was make things worse." Elena sat beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume. "I don't care what they question," she said softly. "I care about what we're building." "We're not building anything," Marcus said, the words cutting him. "We're playing house in two different worlds, and when reality hits, people like me get crushed." Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady but hurt. "So what are you saying?" Marcus looked at her, memorizing her face. "Before he destroyed whatever they'd found together. I'm saying maybe we should stop pretending this can work." The silence that followed felt like something breaking beyond repair. The board meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock, but at noon, Marcus found himself in Hayes's office, staring at a folder that would change everything. Tony sat beside him, and Hayes looked like a man who'd aged years in days. "Elena Rodriguez filed a formal complaint with the Fair Housing Commission yesterday," Hayes said, sliding documents across his desk. "She's claiming systematic discrimination against minority staff." Marcus opened the folder to find 3 years of documented incidents. His name appeared frequently, but so did others. Carlos from landscaping, Denise from housekeeping, Jerome from security. "She's got evidence going back to 2021, Tony said. "Written complaints, disciplinary actions, witness statements." Marcus scanned the pages. Carlos written up for inappropriate conversation after asking about a resident's grandchildren. Denise reprimanded for being too familiar when she'd helped an elderly woman carry groceries. Jerome questioned about his attitude after politely redirecting a drunk resident. "Is this accurate?" Marcus asked Hayes. Hayes's silence was answer enough. "The commission wants to interview all current and former minority staff," Hayes continued. "They're threatening full federal investigation. And if they find discrimination? Fines, federal oversight, possible criminal charges for housing violations. The board is panicking. This could destroy the building's reputation." Marcus stared at the documents, understanding dawning. This wasn't about him and Elena at all. This was about a system that had been functioning exactly as designed until someone with resources decided to shine light on it. "What do they want?" "Who from me?" Hayes rubbed his temples. "Emergency board meeting tonight, 6 o'clock. They want to hear from you directly about whether you'll corroborate Ms. Rodriguez's claims." Marcus looked at Tony, who'd worked here longer than anyone. "What do you think I should do?" Marcus asked. Tony was quiet for a moment. "I think some conversations are worth having in public. Elena Rodriguez just handed you something powerful." Hayes sighed. 6 o'clock, Williams. Whatever you decide to say, make sure you can live with the consequences." As Marcus left the office, he realized Elena hadn't just defended him, she'd armed him. The question wasn't whether he had courage to use those weapons. The question was whether he was ready to stop being invisible forever. The community center filled beyond capacity by 6:30. Word had spread through social media. The Fair Housing Commission hearing that started as a private board meeting had become a public forum. Marcus sat in the front row, his work uniform replaced by his best shirt and tie, watching dozens of faces he recognized. Elena sat 3 rows behind him. They hadn't spoken since his apartment, but he felt her presence like gravity. Board chair Margaret Whitman called for order, her silver hair perfect, her expression suggesting she'd rather be anywhere else. "We're here to address allegations of discriminatory practices at Meridian Heights. Mr. Williams has requested to make a statement." Marcus stood, his legs steadier than expected. The room went quiet except for fluorescent lights and distant traffic. "My name is Marcus Williams. I've worked at Meridian Heights for 2 years as maintenance staff." His voice carried clearly. "I'm here because I used to believe that keeping my head down and doing good work was enough, that if I stayed invisible I'd be safe." He looked at Mrs. Patterson in the 3rd row, her face carefully neutral. "But there is no safety in invisibility when the system itself is designed to keep you moving in only one direction." Marcus pulled out Elena's folder. 3 years of documented incidents, staff disciplined for behaviors that would be considered friendly in others. Carlos Mendez, written up for asking a resident about her grandchildren. Denise Washington, reprimanded for helping an elderly man with groceries. Murmurs rippled through the room. Marcus saw Carlos and Denise near the back, along with other current and former building employees. "I was told my job was in jeopardy because I had dinner with a resident who asked me, not because I pursued anything inappropriate, but because the optics made people uncomfortable." Marcus's voice grew stronger. "The same people who expect me to fix their electrical problems at midnight don't want to acknowledge that I exist as a human being outside those problems." Board member Harrison Cole leaned forward. "Mr. Williams, surely you understand that professional boundaries are applied selectively." Marcus interrupted. "I've watched white contractors take residents to lunch. I've seen you personally invite service technicians to holiday parties. Professional boundaries seem to shift depending on who's crossing them." The room erupted in voices, some supportive, some angry. Whitman called for order. Marcus looked back at Elena, who nodded encouragement, then turned to address the room. "I'm not here to destroy anyone's comfortable illusions," he said. "I'm here to demand that comfort stops coming at the expense of other people's dignity." For the first time in his life, Marcus Williams refused to be invisible. 2 weeks after the hearing, Marcus found himself in Hayes's office again, but the atmosphere had shifted. The Fair Housing Commission's preliminary findings sat on the desk between them, a thick report that had cost the building's insurance company significant money and the board considerable embarrassment. The commission recommended mediation rather than federal intervention, Hayes said, looking older but oddly relieved, provided we implement their suggested changes immediately. Marcus nodded, reading through the requirements. Diversity training for all staff and residents, clear, written policies about employee-resident interactions, regular reviews of disciplinary actions for potential bias. There's something else, Hayes continued. The board voted to create a new position, Building Operations Supervisor. They want someone who understands both the technical and human aspects of property management. Marcus looked up from the report. You offering me a promotion? I'm offering you a chance to help fix what we broke. Hayes leaned forward. Better pay, benefits, some actual authority. You'd oversee maintenance staff, coordinate with residents, ensure we're following the new protocols. Marcus considered the offer. More money meant security for his mother, better insurance, the possibility of a future that extended beyond day-to-day survival. I need to think about it, Marcus said. That evening, he found Elena in the building's renovated community room, helping set up chairs for a residents' meeting about the commission's recommendations. She looked up when he entered, her smile cautious, but genuine. How did it go with Hayes? She asked. They offered me a promotion. Marcus picked up a stack of chairs, began arranging them in neat rows. Supervisor position, better pay, real authority. Elena paused in her work. That's wonderful, isn't it? I'm not sure. Marcus set down the last chair, turned to face her. 2 weeks ago, they wanted to fire me for having dinner with you. Now they want to promote me because a federal commission told them to. Does the motivation matter if the result is progress? Marcus studied her face, noting the careful distance she'd maintained since the hearing. They'd worked together on the community response, coordinated with other residents who supported the changes, but they hadn't talked about them, about what they were or might become. Depends, Marcus said. Progress toward what? Elena stepped closer, close enough that he could see the vulnerability she'd been hiding behind professional efficiency. Maybe we could figure that out together, she said quietly. If you're willing to try again. Marcus looked around the community room, imagining it filled with residents and staff working together instead of existing in carefully segregated spaces. New terms, he said. Real ones this time. Elena smiled. I'd like that. Marcus Williams stood in the building's renovated lobby, reviewing the morning work orders on his tablet. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the new community board, where residents posted everything from babysitting requests to dinner invitations. A year had passed since the Fair Housing Commission hearing, and Meridian Heights had become something neither he nor Eleanor could have imagined that stormy night. Morning, Marcus. Mrs. Chen, David's wife, not the complaining resident, approached with coffee and a smile. The new tenant in 8B wants to thank you personally for helping with her move-in yesterday. Marcus nodded, making a note to check her electrical outlets later. Small gestures like this had become routine, residents treating building staff as neighbors rather than invisible service providers. Elena emerged from the elevator wearing jeans and a Georgetown sweatshirt, weekend casual after a week of corporate litigation. She'd moved to a smaller unit on the 15th floor 6 months ago, claiming she needed less space and more community. Marcus suspected she just wanted to be closer to the life they were building together. Ready for the market? She asked, adjusting the canvas shopping bag on her shoulder. 5 minutes, Marcus replied, finishing his notes. Carlos wants to discuss the rooftop garden proposal with the board next week. Good. Mrs. Patterson's been asking about herb varieties. Elena's smile held traces of amazement. The same woman, who'd once complained about Marcus's familiarity, now sought his advice on building improvements. They walked to the farmer's market together, a Saturday ritual that had evolved naturally from shared grocery runs to something deeper. Marcus noticed how Elena greeted vendors by name, how she'd learned to navigate his world with the same confidence she brought to courtrooms. At the vegetable stand, she selected tomatoes with the precision of someone who'd finally learned to cook for pleasure rather than survival. "My mother wants to meet you," Marcus said, watching Elena examine basil plants. "She's having Sunday dinner next week." Elena looked up, surprised. They'd been careful about family introductions, both understanding the weight such meetings carried. "You sure about that?" she asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. A year ago, he would have been terrified of mixing his worlds. Now he realized they weren't different worlds at all, just different neighborhoods in the same community they were building together. "I'm sure," he said. "She makes the best cornbread in East Charlotte." Elena smiled, the expression carrying all the earned intimacy of storms, weathered and ground-held. "Then yes," she said, "I'd love to meet her." As they walked home through streets that no longer felt like boundaries between their lives, Marcus understood what they'd actually accomplished. They hadn't just survived the scrutiny or changed building policies. They'd proven that love could be a form of construction, building bridges where others saw only walls.